Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Mr. Mackenzie's Distance Learning, The Move to Global War, The Rise of Fascism in Italy, Part 2. Let's begin now. Today we will be talking about how Mussolini consolidates his power, how he really moves from prime minister to Il Duce, the supreme dictator of Italy. Now, one thing I do want you to remember is that this is all going to be happening in the early 20s. This is a good 10 years before Adolf Hitler takes power in Germany. So what Mussolini is doing now in the early 20s is really setting the template for what Hitler is going to do in the mid to late 30s in Germany. Now, in February of 1923, this is pretty much right at the end of what was known as liberal Italy. This is just before Italy really becomes a totalitarian one-party state. At this time, there's many different political parties in Italy, none of which have a majority of seats in the Italian government or the Italian parliament. In February of 1923, the Nationalist Party joins with the Fascist Party in an attempt to get more sway, more power, more seats in government. Now, what do these two parties have in common? The Nationalist Party and the Fascist Party. Well, they have similar foreign policy goals. They're both looking to build an empire. They both want to gain overseas territories. And of course, they're both very nationalistic, right? The Nationalist Party, nationalistic. Fascist Party is ultra nationalistic as well. In July of 1923, what's known as the Acerbo Laws are introduced. The Acerbo Laws. This is not extremely important for you to know, but if you want to look this up, feel free to go ahead. It's spelled Aecerbo, I believe, Acerbo Laws. Now, this meant that any party in Italy that gets the most votes in an election will receive 2/3 of the parliament seats. Now, this was going to be very beneficial to the Fascist Party because even though they didn't get the majority of votes, they did get the most votes. And this is going to help them bring more power in Parliament, more seats in Parliament. And this was really to bring more order and consistency in the Italian government, a way for the Fascist Party to dominate. By January 1925, Mussolini goes from prime minister to Il Duce, which basically means the Duke of Fascism. He gets that title, Il Duce. It means the leader, it means the Duke of Fascism. Il Duce is to Mussolini as De Fuhrer is to Hitler. And he's proclaiming himself the leader of Italy. Now, I believe the year is wrong on my slide here. This should read December 1925. Mussolini is given supreme executive authority. There's no checks on him except the king. So Mussolini, in many ways, does become dictator at this point, a totalitarian dictator, but he's not going to have the same ultimate control that Hitler will. Hitler will gain, he'll be an absolute totalitarian dictator. Mussolini does not get to enjoy the same kind of total control that Hitler does because the king still can remove Mussolini. The king can keep a check on Mussolini. And as well, the Catholic Church can also keep a check on Mussolini as well. We have to remember that in Italy, there are many Roman Catholics. And if Mussolini's government goes against the Catholic Church, many of those devout Catholics would also probably turn on the fascist government as well. So now Mussolini is going to unroll his totalitarian beginner's package here. Okay, he unrolls all the factors we see about a totalitarian dictator. So what is he going to do? Well, political parties will be banned. In a totalitarian state, it is just one party system, and that's the fascist party. So he's going to disband all other political parties. So there'll be less tensions in parliament, there'll be less disputes with only having one political party. And any opposition is not allowed. Any opposition to his government is not allowed. He's also going to ban trade unions, or those labor unions that we were talking about. Again, earlier on in our case study, we saw how there was many different divisions within Italy. There was divisions between rich and poor. There was divisions between political parties. There's divisions between the trade unions and the factory owners. Well, this totalitarian system is now going to get rid of those tensions. And also, the trade unions had a lot of kind of socialist, if not communist, characteristics that the government definitely did not like. He's also going to take over the press. Okay, the government will take over the press. There will be no free press, meaning there is no real free journalism to investigate or ask questions or keep the government in check. We see a lot of that happening today, right? We see our governments in Canada and a lot in the United States where the journalists are questioning the leaders. Kind of they're making them accountable for their actions, and they have people to answer to. When they take that away, when they take away the free press, they kind of have free reign. No one questions their tactics or their authority. No more elected officials. Okay, so we're kind of seeing democracy at a standstill here. No more elected officials. Mussolini is going to appoint all of the officials now, and they're obviously going to be fascists or fascist sympathizers. In 1926, Mussolini develops his own secret police. I'm sure you would have heard of the Gestapo for Germany. Mussolini had his own secret police force, the OVRA, Organization for Vigilance and Repression of Anti-Fascism. So anyone who was anti-fascist, anyone who was against his government, spoke out against his government, wrote newspaper pamphlets or articles that were anti-fascist, could have been visited late at night by this secret police, to be hauled off, never to be seen again. Trials without juries were beginning to be held. So no more trial by jury, just trial by judges. And these judges were also appointed by Mussolini. So any kind of evidence or witnesses that may have helped you could have been gone out the window. It's really, everyone is in the pocket of Mussolini here. Everyone has been appointed by Mussolini. The death penalty is expanded, which is now going to include actions against the government's authority. So we can see here Mussolini and his fascist government is starting to take a firm grip on Italy. Even youth organizations are being developed. I'm sure we would have heard a lot about this when we studied, or when you studied grade 10 history and you looked at Nazi Germany, you would have saw Nazi youth groups. This is the same sort of thing. Fascist youth movements were starting up in the early 20s, the early to mid 20s in Italy. Again, all of this is really happening a good decade before Hitler is taking over in Germany. So Hitler is really going to be using the totalitarian playbook that Mussolini is writing right now. So fascist youth movements are starting up. Now, what is the benefit of this? You probably would have answered this when you studied Nazi Germany and the Hitler Youth, but what is the benefit of this? Well, this is really just to get the young men or the young boys in Italy in lockstep with the ideology of the fascist state. Once you have them in step with your ideologies, these boys are growing up as good, loyal fascists to the totalitarian state. Here we have two pictures of these fascist movements. The Opera Nazionale Balbilla, or the ONB, was an Italian fascist youth organization functioning as an addition to school education between 1926 and 1937. Again, we can almost see the Hitler salutes there. So really, that was just an extension of the fascists' salute, showing deep loyalty and honor to the state and to the dictator Mussolini. And on the right, the Sons of the She-Wolf, an Italian fascist organization aimed at backing the Italian youth, gathered boys from 4 to 8 years old. Now, like I said, there are some limits to Mussolini's totalitarian regime. It won't be as complete as Hitler's will be in the mid to late 30s. There's a few entities and organizations that can keep a check on Mussolini's power. The first one is the king. The king can take Mussolini out of power. Mussolini also has a relationship with the Catholic Church. Like I said before, most of Italy are Catholic. So he really needs the support of the Catholic Church. If the Catholic Church turns on Mussolini, what might Italy do? Well, they might turn on him too. But the Catholic Church is aligning themselves with this fascist government because in the past, during that liberal Italy time, they weren't getting as much say in the government. They wanted that separation between church and state. But now it seems that they're being drawn back into politics and have more of a say on foreign and domestic policy. So the Catholic Church is aligning itself with the fascists, but Mussolini really has to kind of keep the Catholic Church in mind and has to kind of bow to them a little bit because he doesn't want to sway or have all those Catholic citizens turn away from the fascists. So let's have a look at what Mussolini's goals were, at least in terms of his foreign policy. Mussolini wants to increase national pride. Grow national pride he can do this. He can grow that national pride by revisiting the post-World War I settlements. Remember, Italy was on the winning side of World War I, but didn't get its due, or at least it didn't feel like they got their due at the treaties. What they were owed based on what they were promised, they didn't get quite what they wanted. Another goal of Mussolini is to dominate the Balkan region. You should have a good, clear idea where the Balkans are. We went over this in depth during World War I. It was that powder keg of Europe before it exploded into war. Now we're going to see all sorts of new independent countries in the Balkans. Italy wants to start off and have good relations with these new countries and eventually make it its sphere of influence again, if not completely take over the Balkan region. Another thing they want to do is dominate the Mediterranean. You should definitely know where the Mediterranean Sea is. Let's blow up the map here. Okay? In Roman times, the Mediterranean Sea was called a Roman lake. This is the time of the Roman Empire when they controlled everything from Spain to the Mideast and all of North Africa, fully encompassing the Mediterranean Sea. So it truly was a Roman lake. Mussolini wants to make the Mediterranean a Roman lake again. So he very much sees himself as a new Roman Caesar, bringing back the glory days of the Roman Empire. So he's going to fuel his people with this kind of spirit of nationalism, to grow national pride, to make Italy great again, like it was in the glory days of the Roman Empire. Another goal of Mussolini's is Spazio Vitaly. Now, this means living space. You may have heard of the term Lebensraum. That's Germany looking for its living space in kind of Eastern Europe. But Spazio Vitaly is Italy looking for living space for its growing population. And where are they going to look? Well, they're going to look to Africa. Okay, they can do this in Africa. This is where Italy can expand. Right, we see the Horn of Africa there. They have Italian Somaliland. They have Eritrea. They're going to have a sphere of influence in Abyssinia. Okay, another kind of battle and takeover or crisis is going to happen in Abyssinia in the coming years for Italy. And in northern Italy, they're going to kind of take over the area of Libya. So in 1923, again, we have Mussolini's foreign policy looking to dominate the Balkans. So we see kind of the first places where their aggression is going to take fold is the Greek island of Corfu. You can see it on this map here. It's on the coast of the Ionian Sea, just north of Greece there. You can see Corfu right there. And there's right across the Ionian Sea and the Adriatic to the north is the Italian Peninsula. So in 1923, Italy is wanting to dominate the Balkans. It's going to make its first move on the Greek Isle of Corfu. Now, it has justification to step into Corfu to look like it's going to be taking it over because an Italian official was killed in Greece. And obviously, Mussolini wants retaliation. So he's going to send an army to seize the Greek island of Corfu. Really, now we're starting to see him taking steps to take over another area. Now, what is the League of Nations going to do about this? Here we have Italy taking aggressive military action on the island of Corfu. I mean, this is what the League of Nations was made to do, to kind of step in and maintain collective security. Well, they're going to condemn this. That's what they do. And that's what they do best. Kind of wag the finger at these aggressive nations and condemn their actions. Britain will take it a little bit further. Britain, who has a lot of interest and influence in this area of Greece, will condemn Italy and tell them to remove themselves, back out of there. We're not afraid to use our navy against you, Italy, is basically what the British are saying. Mussolini recognizes Italy is not ready to fight. He hasn't built up his navy and his army to the point of full-on war against the British yet. So he recognizes that Italy is not ready to fight, especially against the British Navy, and he is going to back out of this fight. So he's going to retreat from Corfu because the British Navy, the British government really steps up, kind of taking a step away from the League of Nations, taking the lead and saying, remove your forces from Corfu. Now we can kind of make a parallel here. Now this is the early 20s where the British are really kind of threatening Italy, saying remove your forces from Corfu or face the might of our British Navy. Alternately, when we looked at the Manchuria crisis, which happened in the early 30s amongst the Great Depression, things were much more difficult. The British Navy does not really step in and help out Manchuria. They didn't really have that much of economic interest in Manchuria the way they do in Greece, so they kind of leave the Manchurians to suffer the fate they had to the Japanese. But the British do have an economic interest in Greece. And this is the early 20s, and they're still very powerful, so they can really step up and threaten Mussolini with war. Mussolini, who's not ready to go battle the British Navy, retreats its forces. Let's take a look at the political cartoon here. This is, I believe, from the magazine Punch. We do see a lot of recurring stuff in IB Paper 1 tests. I know they like to use David Lowe quite a bit, very popular illustrator. Cartoons from the political magazine Punch are also used quite a bit as well. So feel free on a rainy Sunday to Google image a lot of Punch magazine political cartoons and David Lowe's. This one here obviously is very symbolic. We see Mussolini here looking like a Caesar of ancient Rome. The latest Caesar is the title here. Signor Mussolini, a bit above himself. I do bestride the narrow world like a colossus. A colossus is a big kind of giant, obviously seen here by his size, that he can now straddle the Ionian and Adriatic Sea between Italy and Corfu. This is also a play on the Shakespearean play Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2, which the cartoon is now showing Benito Mussolini straddling Italy and Corfu during the interwar era. So the very next year, 1924, Italy will take over and seize the port city of Fiume in Yugoslavia. Now, according to the Treaty of London, which ultimately brought Italy into World War I, Italy was supposed to receive this port, but they never saw that as a result of the war. Instead, it was granted to the new nation of Yugoslavia. So in 1924, Italy will seize this port. They're not going to back off of this one like they did with Corfu. Ultimately, it's not of as much interest to other nations in Europe. Great Britain wasn't too economically interested in Fiume or Yugoslavia. Other European nations, the only really big European nation that's going to be somewhat worried about what's going on in the Balkans in this area will be France. We're going to kind of see Italy and France's relationship increase in tension over the next few slides. You can see Fiume on the map here. It is dotted with the yellow color there. This is obviously an older map. Okay, we still have Austria-Hungary on the map here. So we can imagine where the area of Yugoslavia is going to be, that kind of new Serb kingdom of Yugoslavia along the coastline there. Yugoslavia will get the port city of Fiume. Now, this will make Italy upset because, according to the Treaty of London, it was supposed to be theirs. So, as Italy is seizing this port city of Fiume in Yugoslavia, it might not really worry Great Britain so much, but it does start to make France a little bit nervous. I Google searched worried Frenchman, and this is what I got on Google Images. That's a worried Frenchman right there. So France is nervous. Ultimately, they want good relationships with these new countries of the Balkans as well. Really, just in case Germany rises up again, they need a friend in that region. So they want good relations with the Balkans. They're going to form what's called the Small Entente or the Petite Entente with some of these Balkan nations, because ultimately they do not trust Germany. Okay, the Treaty of Versailles really kind of left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Germany obviously did not like it. The French did not like it either. They wanted to see Germany ripped apart and separated into smaller states. So France is very worried and cautious about Germany. So they want good relationships in the Balkans act to help them out on maybe a possible two-front war again if Germany decides to rise up again. They can't really rely on Russia. The old Entente created a two-front war for Germany because they were trapped between France and Russia. Well, now they can't really rely on Russia at this time. Why not? What has Russia become? A communist state. They are now the Soviet Union, so they can't really rely on them. France is dealing with communist uprisings in its own country. It's not happy with that, its own kind of Red Scare. So they really need good relations with the Balkans, a petite entente that will help take down a growing, aggressive Germany. So France is putting money into this new petite entente, the little entente. France is putting money into Yugoslavia as well as Czechoslovakia. So that is your little entente. France, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. Italy is taking more assertive role in Eastern Europe at this time as well. In 1924, Italy signs a treaty of friendship with Albania. Albania is just across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. Albania is a step towards Balkan domination. Now this is going to upset France. Okay, I Google imaged upset Frenchmen. That's what I got. That's what I put in the show. So this upsets France because they're trying to dominate the Balkans as well. Italy and France are now going to butt heads in North Africa. Mussolini and Italy want their Spazio Vitaly, their living space in North Africa. But France has most of the area under their control. If we look at the map here, we can see the purple or the kind of the light purple areas. The light purple area is what the French controlled, and the light yellow area is what the Italians controlled. So the French do have a very good stake in the continent of Africa. So now at this time, in kind of the early to mid 1920s, Italy and France have a great little rivalry going. So now we're going to see Mussolini, the internationalist. For most of our talk, ultimately, we know that Mussolini is a nationalist. Deep down, he's a nationalist. He's looking to expand Italian territory, make them equivalent to the Roman Empire again, make the Mediterranean a Roman lake, increase nationalism and pride, more space for their growing population, colonies for resources and economic gain for Italy. So we know ultimately he's a nationalist. But on the world stage for most of the 20s, Mussolini will play the part of the internationalist. And a great example of that is in 1925, there's a meeting in Switzerland. This is called the Locarno Conference. The Locarno Treaty. And this is, we see Britain, France, Belgium, Italy, and Germany. Okay, 5 nations pretty much signing this agreement to a mutual defense pact. Okay, that's what the Locarno Conference is. These 5 nations agreeing to a mutual defense pact. Also at these Locarno conferences, we see agreement about the borders from the Paris Peace Treaties, kind of unresolved issues from the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so Germany will finally settle on those western borders, kind of where the Western Front was. Germany and the Netherlands, Germany and Belgium, Germany and France, that western border there. Germany will finally settle on this. We have to remember that in 1919, at the Treaty of Versailles, Germany signs the Treaty of the Peace Paris Treaty under duress. They're being forced to sign this. Now, a good 6 years later, in this spirit of internationalism now, Germany finally says, okay, we agree to these western borders. It doesn't really say anything about the eastern borders. That is really still up for negotiation in the minds of Germany. But Germany at this conference agrees to the western borders. And it's really Mussolini who's kind of calling the shots of these meetings. So Mussolini is very much stepping up on the world stage as a major player here, kind of dictating how foreign relations within Europe and the world is going to be met. So now we can draw a very good similarity between Italy and Japan. Italy wants to be seen as a player with the great powers of Europe. The same way Japan wanted to be seen as a Western style power. Okay, so we can draw many similarities between the two nations. The spirit oath of Locarno. Okay, nations are working together. This is that international spirit that we see in the 1920s. These nations are working together to prevent war again. We see, since World War I, we have the establishment of the League of Nations. We have the Washington Naval Conference, which limited shipping power and how big your guns on your ships could be. We have the Locarno conferences, kind of ending disputes that still were up in the air from the Treaty of Versailles. We also have the KelloggBriand Pact, which ultimately was a pact that outlawed war. So we're really trying to keep the peace during the 1920s. Really trying to keep the peace in the 1920s in the spirit of internationalism. The last thing people wanted to do was go out and start war all over again. Everyone had in the back of their mind a good memory of what World War I looked like and the repercussions of that. So the last thing they want to do is start it again. So let's take a closer look at this KelloggBriand Pact of 1928. We've mentioned it before on the previous slide, and in previous lectures we've talked about it. Basically, it's the renunciation of war as an instrument of national policy. That's basically saying we're outlawing war. This is created by the French Foreign Minister, Astrid Briand, and the U.S. Secretary of State, Frank B. Kellogg. This is signed by over 60 nations, including the three we're looking at in our case study. Japan has signed this. Germany and Italy has also signed this. War cannot be used in foreign diplomacy. We cannot wage war. But ultimately, there's no real system to enforce this. This is all just based on good behavior. This is good. This is the hope for good intentions. War will not be waged to solve international disputes is basically what this pact is saying. Mussolini, all the while, will still be making moves to become more powerful. So even though they're signing all of these treaties, the Locarno Conference treaties, the Washington Naval Conference, the KelloggBriand Pact, even though we have Mussolini, the internationalist, we know there's still Mussolini, the nationalist, that's going to be making some aggressive moves to expand the political and economic power of Italy. If we look at the political cartoon here, we can kind of see the ultimate result of these good intentions of the KelloggBriand Peace Pact here. We have the benefit of hindsight to know that this all fails. This spirit of internationalism of the 1920s ultimately fails by the mid to late 30s when war breaks out again, right? We can kind of see the KelloggBriand Pact in the imagery of the birthday cake here. The world is blowing up the candles, and 1939 is obviously a very important year, blows up in the world's face because that's the year World War II begins. So, meanwhile, in Italy, what was going on in Italy? Even though we had Mussolini, the internationalist, we know that he's going to still be making more nationalistic aims with his foreign policy. So Mussolini, all the while, is still making moves to become more powerful. Italy will actually bring in German pilots to train. Okay, they're going to bring in German pilots to train. Now we know, according to the Treaty of Versailles, they were not allowed to have an air force. So they're going against the Treaty of Versailles. The League of Nations is watching Germany. They're not allowed to build up an air force. They're only supposed to have a relatively small army as well. But the German Air Force is going to start to be rebuilt. This is even before Hitler takes over power in Germany. The Air Force is already starting to be built up, as well as the military as well. So Mussolini is making moves to become more powerful. He's going to train German pilots in Italy. Mussolini is also dealing with uprisings in Libya. Okay, Libyan nationalist movement for independence is happening in Libya. So ultimately, Mussolini wants to maintain control there. He's going to send in troops to put down these uprisings. Mussolini is rebuilding an Italian air force that he says will, quote unquote, block out the sun. I feel like this is a good place to stop right now. Thank you for listening. Glad you made it to another end of these talks. And we'll tune in next time to see what happens with Italy and fascism. Thanks for watching. Good night.